They say that family is forever, but when the foundations of faith are built on a ledger of lies, you quickly learn a devastating truth. Loyalty has its limits. For over a decade, we watched a family preach unity, spiritual harmony, and the beauty of plural marriage on reality television. We were sold a narrative of a cohesive unit weathering the storms of life together. But behind closed doors, a silent financial massacre was taking place. Today, we are opening the vault on a secret trial, a story of financial ruin, marital betrayal, and systemic manipulation that was never meant to be told. The family's self-appointed the guardian, the patriarch who demanded absolute submission, is on trial. We aren't dealing with whispers or tabloid rumors today. We brought the receipts. We have the bank statements, the LLC filings, and the hidden property deeds. If you want the truth, if you want to see the mask finally slip from them, patriarch of reality TV's most famous polygamous family, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel right now, because what you are about to hear will change absolutely everything you thought you knew. To understand the crime, you have to first understand the Promised Land. Coyote Pass, Flagstaff, Arizona, 2018. It was supposed to be a utopia, a physical manifestation of their spiritual covenant. 14 acres of pristine Arizona wilderness where 4 wives would build 4 distinct homes, all surrounding a central pond, connected by pathways of eternal familial devotion. It was the ultimate dream of togetherness, a sanctuary far away from the judging eyes of the outside world. The patriarch stood on that land, looking out over the majestic mountain peaks, and promised his wives a kingdom. But kingdoms are not built on promises. They are built on capital. And in this family, the capital was controlled by an entity as secretive and unregulated as a shadow. Corporation. They called it the family pot. For years, this centralized bank account was the lifeblood of the Brown family empire. It was the financial engine that kept the extravagant lifestyle, the endless moves, and the television facade intact. But a machine is only as good as its engine, and the one keeping this entire operation from sinking into the abyss was Janelle. She was the pragmatic, hardworking, analytical backbone of the family. While others focused on spiritual hierarchies or cultivating favor with the patriarch, Janelle was waking up early, commuting, working relentless hours, and balancing the books. She was the one who understood the terrifying reality of their financial fragility. And because she believed in the principle, because she believed in the collective good of the family, she sacrificed everything. When the patriarch demanded they flee Las Vegas for the mountains of Flagstaff, Janelle did what she had always done. She fell in line and funded the fantasy. She liquidated her 401k, draining the safety net she had spent a lifetime building for her golden years. When her beautiful Las Vegas home finally sold, she didn't quietly tuck the equity away into a private account to secure her own future. She handed it over. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, the absolute sum of her life's labor, were poured directly into the family pot to secure the Coyote Pass dream. She was the primary investor in a project she was told would be her forever home. She handed over her sovereignty, trusting that the man who claimed to be the spiritual head of the household would act as a faithful fiduciary. That was her fatal mistake. Because the family pot wasn't a mutual fund. It was a black hole. Once the money crossed the threshold into that centralized account, it ceased to be Janelle's. It became the patriarch's personal war chest, an unregulated slush fund, completely devoid of oversight, transparency, or accountability. The financial conflict was hidden in plain sight, masked by the chaotic, swirling drama of plural marriage. But if you strip away the tears, the arguments over COVID protocols, and the endless therapy sessions, what remains is a cold, calculated transfer of wealth. A systemic siphoning of resources from the working wives to fund a lifestyle of unimaginable luxury for the patriarch and his favored legal wife. Fast forward to 2022. The Arizona sun beats down on Coyote Pass, but the dream is dead. The land is completely barren. There are no foundations. There are no framing timbers. There is only dirt, overgrown weeds, and a muddy runoff ditch that they once affectionately called a pond. 14 acres of nothing. And yet, just a stone's throw away, nestled securely in the dense, towering pines, sits a sprawling, magnificent $890,000 mansion. This is the kingdom. But Janelle doesn't live here. This sprawling estate, filled to the brim with expensive, eclectic art, Dickens villages, and luxury vehicles parked in the heated driveway, belongs entirely to Kody and Robyn. While the patriarch and his legal wife sat insulated in their lavish, climate-controlled fortress, Janelle, the very woman whose liquidated retirement and home equity funded the down payment for that lifestyle, was left out in the cold. Literally. She was forced to buy a cramped, incredibly restrictive recreational vehicle and park it on the barren dirt of Coyote Pass just to have a roof over her head. As the freezing Flagstaff winter rolled in, bringing plunging temperatures and biting winds, the pragmatic financial backbone of the family was struggling to keep her water lines from freezing. She had no plumbing. She had no infrastructure. She had no security. She had poured an absolute fortune into the family's future, and her return on investment was a quote. Tin can be parked on a patch of unbuildable dirt. The money was gone. The family pot, once overflowing with the proceeds of 4 Las Vegas home sales and lucrative television contracts, had been drained dry. Janelle sat in that freezing RV, wrapped in blankets, staring at a spreadsheet that no longer made any mathematical sense. Hundreds of thousands of dollars had simply evaporated. When she asked for the funds to finally break ground on her modest casita, the response from the patriarch was a chilling, dismissive shrug. He told her the money wasn't there. He told her she would just have to wait. He told her to be patient, to be loyal, to continue submitting to the grand vision. But the numbers didn't lie, and Janelle's pragmatic mind began to piece together the terrifying reality of her situation. She wasn't just broke, she had been financially targeted. Our investigation into the property records of Coyote Pass uncovered a devastating internal policy that was never broadcast on television. It was a calculated, geographical segregation that the family quietly referred to in hushed, bitter tones as the sun tax. This wasn't just a matter of bad financial planning or a stalled construction project. This was a deliberate manipulation of assets designed to ensure that even if the wives ever managed to scrape together the funds to build, they would never be on equal footing. When you pull the topographical maps of Coyote Pass and lay the property lines out in neon red, a sickening pattern of systemic discrimination emerges. The lots were not divided equally. The parcels of land with the highest appraisal value, the absolute best soil for laying a concrete foundation, and the premium unobstructed sunlight exposure were quietly and legally deeded directly into the names of Kody and his legal wife, Robyn. These were the golden lots, the prime real estate that held actual, tangible value. The remaining wives, the ones who had actually funded the purchase of the entire 14 acres, were relegated to the shaded, rocky, treacherous runoff zones. They were given the literal darkness. If Janelle wanted to build a home on her designated plot, she wouldn't just be paying for lumber and drywall. She would be forced to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in exorbitant engineering costs just to blast through the solid bedrock beneath her topsoil. She would have to pay to route plumbing through a geographical nightmare. It was an invisible, insurmountable tax levied against her simply for not being the favorite wife. The bias, the blatant favoritism, and the financial suffocation weren't just implied by the patriarch's behavior. They were literally written into the dirt. Janelle was paying the sun tax. Her life savings had purchased the premium land, but she was legally and geographically barred from ever standing in the light. Sitting in the freezing dark of her RV, listening to the wind howl against the thin metal walls, Janelle realized that her loyalty had been weaponized against her. She had built an empire, only to discover she was legally classified as a renter in her own life. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She wasn't a partner in a spiritual covenant. She was a resource to be mined, depleted, and discarded when she dared to ask for her fair share. But they underestimated the accountant. They forgot that Janelle was the one who always kept the receipts. The pragmatic backbone of the family was about to snap, and she was preparing to take the patriarch to a secret trial that would tear the entire Shadow Empire straight down to the studs. For years, Janelle believed her name was rightfully etched onto the master deed of their shared future. She believed her unwavering, stoic loyalty guaranteed her seat at the table and absolute security in her twilight years. But money leaves a trail, and spreadsheets do not care about spiritual covenants. Sitting alone in that freezing recreational vehicle, illuminated only by the harsh blue glow of her laptop screen, Janelle stopped crying and started calculating. She bypassed the emotional manipulation that had governed their family dynamics for decades and went straight for the raw data. She demanded the ledgers. She logged into the sprawling web of joint accounts, routing numbers, and historical bank statements that mapped out the entire financial anatomy of the Brown family empire. And what she found, lurking beneath the surface of their plural utopia, was a labyrinth of systemic financial diversion. The money hadn't just evaporated into thin air due to poor planning or economic downturns. Money never simply evaporates. It is moving. It is hidden. It is spent. This is the knockout punch. This is the ultimate devastating betrayal of trust that shatters the illusion of the patriarch's divine leadership. Tracing the digital footprints of the family pot, our investigation, alongside forensic experts, revealed a terrifying timeline of asset stripping. When Janelle's Las Vegas home sold, generating a massive influx of $250,000 in pure equity, those funds were deposited directly into the supposedly communal family account. But they didn't stay there. Within a matter of days, massive, calculated withdrawals were executed. Hundreds of thousands of dollars were quietly, methodically funneled out of the collective family trust and wired directly into a newly established, entirely private, limited liability company. The name on the incorporation documents was Dabsark Entertainment. To the untrained eye, it was just another corporate entity in a web of reality television business filings. But to Janelle, reading the incorporation documents, in the dead of winter, it was a death warrant for her financial future. Dabsark was not a family company. It was an impenetrable legal fortress built for two. The company was entirely, exclusively controlled by Kody and his legal wife, Robyn. The name itself was a cruel, exclusionary acronym, a combination of the initials of Kody, Robyn, and Robyn's children. Janelle's name was completely, legally absent. Her blood, her sweat, her decades of labor, and the absolute entirety of her retirement savings had been funneled into a shadow corporation that legally recognized her as nothing more than an uncompensated donor. The evidence of deception was absolute, and the reality of where her money had actually gone was sickening. Janelle's liquidated retirement wasn't sitting in an escrow account waiting to fund a concrete foundation on Coyote Pass. It had been spent on a neighboring mansion. Her hard-earned Vegas equity had been seamlessly laundered through Dabsark and transformed into tangible, hoardable luxury assets for the patriarch's exclusive enjoyment. While Janelle was boiling water on a propane stove just to wash her hands, her money was funding an absolute museum of grift. Hundreds of thousands of dollars were funneled into a bizarre, extravagant hoarding addiction. The funds purchased towering, expensive Dickens Village collectibles. They bought gleaming Rolex watches that flashed on the patriarch's wrist as he looked into the reality television cameras and lamented the family's poverty. They purchased massive, ugly, incredibly expensive paintings that lined the walls of a heated, luxurious house that Janelle wasn't even allowed to freely enter. She had funded a kingdom, only to discover she was legally classified as a peasant. The patriarch had used her deep-seated religious beliefs, her commitment to the family culture, and her unwavering loyalty as collateral for his own luxury. It was a perfectly executed, slow-motion swindle, masked by the chaotic distraction of a television show. But the moment the mathematical reality of Dabsark Entertainment clicked into place, the spell was broken. Janelle slammed her laptop shut. The spiritual marriage was dead, replaced instantly by the cold, hard reality of financial fraud. She didn't need another therapy session on a producer's couch. She didn't need to have a tearful, circular conversation about communication and feelings. She needed a forensic accountant, a ruthless litigator, and a reckoning. Janelle didn't just walk away into the night to quietly lick her wounds like the patriarch expected. She lawyered up. What followed was an event that the reality television cameras were never allowed to capture. a secret trial. A closed-door, high-stakes financial mediation that permanently shattered the carefully curated illusion of the patriarchal utopia. The scene shifts far away from the muddy, barren ditches of Coyote Pass to a sterile, brightly lit mediation room in a high-end corporate law office in downtown Flagstaff. The atmosphere is suffocatingly tense, governed by the heavy, rhythmic ticking of a wall clock that sounds like a gavel striking wood with every passing second. The mahogany table in the center of the room represents a battlefield where spiritual authority holds absolutely zero jurisdiction. On one side sits the patriarch. He walks into the room expecting what he has always received: submission, deference, and tears. He is dressed sharply, his posture arrogant, fully prepared to utilize his decades of experience in manipulating the narrative to talk his way out of this inconvenience. But as he sits down, the reality of the room begins to set in. There are no producers to cut the cameras. There are no confessionals where he can play the victim. There is only Janelle sitting across from him, entirely devoid of emotion, her eyes locked onto him with a cold, piercing clarity he has never seen before. Beside her sits a seasoned, aggressive financial attorney, and resting on the center of the mahogany table is a towering stack of heavily highlighted bank statements, wire transfer receipts, and the incorporation documents for Dabsark LLC. The patriarch begins to sweat. He fidgets in his leather chair, his eyes darting frantically to the door, realizing too late that he has walked directly into an ambush. The legal cross-examination does not begin with pleasantries. It begins with a surgical strike. Janelle's attorney leans forward, locking eyes with the man who claimed to be a king, and delivers the opening salvo with a voice that is sharp, unrelenting, and completely devoid of mercy. The lawyer slides a single sheet of paper across the table, a bank statement heavily redacted in black ink, save for a single, glaring, six-figure transfer. The attorney demands an explanation. He asks the patriarch, on the official record, to explain exactly why $250,000 of his client's personal equity payout was deposited into a communal joint account, only to be transferred a mere 72 hours later into a private exclusive trust that legally barred the primary investor from any ownership. The question hangs in the air, a devastating indictment of a decade-long grift. The counter-arguments from the patriarch are as desperate as they are incredibly insulting. Cornered by the irrefutable paper trail, the man who spent years projecting an image of stoic leadership begins to unravel completely. He attempts to reframe the financial diversion as a spiritual necessity. He stammers, his voice cracking with a potent mixture of panic and boiling rage, claiming the massive transfer of wealth was a gift to the family structure. He attempts to invoke the archaic laws of their fundamentalist sect, loudly, proclaiming that the patriarchal structure inherently meant he possessed absolute, sovereign control over all familial assets, regardless of whose name was on the initial check. He slams his hand down on the heavy mahogany table, a loud, echoing crack that shatters the sterile silence of the mediation room. He attempts to dominate the physical space, puffing his chest, his face flushing crimson as he resorts to the only tactic he has left: intimidation. He shouts across the table, demanding to know where the loyalty has gone. He decries the legal proceedings as a betrayal of their eternal covenant, screaming that Janelle is part of a plural family, that the money belongs to the kingdom, and that he, as the absolute head of that family, had the divine right to allocate resources as he saw fit. He demands respect. He demands submission. He demands that the documents be thrown away and the natural order of his household be restored. But his rage, once a terrifying weapon that kept his wives in line, is completely, entirely useless in a room governed by perjury laws and breach of fiduciary duty. Janelle does not flinch. She does not look away. She does not shed a single tear. She sits composed, staring a hole directly through the man she spent 3 decades serving, watching the pathetic crumbling of a tyrant who has finally run out of shadows to hide in. The financial backbone of the family is no longer bending. She is ready to deliver the final, fatal blow to the shadow empire, and the patriarch is about to learn exactly what happens when the bank finally calls in the debt. The echoes of his rage bounced off the frosted glass of the corporate conference room, dying utterly in the suffocating silence that followed. For a man who had spent his entire adult life dictating the emotional and financial climate of a sprawling family, the realization that his shouting possessed absolutely no currency in this room was a paralyzing shock. Janelle did not shrink back into her chair. She did not lower her eyes in quiet submission. Nor did she offer the tearful apologies he had been conditioned to expect whenever he threw a patriarchal tantrum. Instead, she leaned forward, resting her arms on the mahogany table, and looked at him with the terrifying, clinical detachment of an auditor who has just found the fatal discrepancy in a fraudulent ledger. When she finally spoke, her voice was not raised, but it cut through the sterile air of the mediation room like a scalpel slicing through decaying tissue. She looked directly into the eyes of the man who had promised her eternity and asked him exactly what loyalty meant to a man who used his wives as human ATMs. She laid bare the ugly, irrefutable truth of their entire dynamic, stating with absolute, bone-chilling clarity that he had weaponized her devotion, using her sacred loyalty as collateral for his own worldly luxury. She told him, under the watchful gaze of her legal counsel, that she did not fund a spiritual kingdom on Coyote Pass. She had funded a grift. And she was not leaving that room until every single cent was returned. The patriarch's face drained of color as Janelle's attorney took over, sliding a new document across the table. It was not a plea for reconciliation. It was a draft for a massive, multi-million-dollar fraud and breach of contract lawsuit. The attorney outlined the exact, terrifying sequence of events that would follow if the patriarch did not immediately surrender. There would be no more closed-door family meetings. There would be subpoenas. There would be a ruthless, entirely public discovery phase where every single bank account, every hidden trust, and every wire transfer executed over the last decade would be dragged into the unforgiving light of a federal courtroom. The attorney slowly, deliberately pronounced the two words that strike absolute terror into the heart of anyone running an unregulated shadow empire: forensic audit. If they went to court, Dabsark Entertainment would be pried open. The LLC that Kody and Robyn had so carefully constructed as a private fortress to hoard the family's wealth would be mathematically dissected by state-appointed financial investigators. The Dickens villages, the luxury watches, the obscure art pieces, the vehicles, and the sprawling mansion itself would be cataloged, appraised, and potentially seized as assets purchased with commingled, misappropriated funds. The veil of their reality television contracts would be pierced. The illusion of the struggling, persecuted polygamist family would be shattered in the public record, replaced by the damning reality of a calculated, systemic financial abuse scheme. The patriarch was trapped. He was cornered by his own greed, suffocated by the meticulously documented paper trail he arrogantly believed would never see the light of day. Without the cameras of reality television to manipulate, without the protective bubble of his self-created religious echo chamber where he could play the perpetual victim, he was nothing more than a man caught with his hands buried deep inside a stolen vault. Under the crushing, insurmountable weight of cross-examination and the imminent threat of financial ruin, the patriarch completely crumbled. The arrogant, posturing king who had walked into the room demanding submission was reduced to a sweating, trembling husk of a man frantically searching for an exit strategy. But there was no way out. The final verdict of this secret trial was not broadcast on national television for millions to dissect. It was not accompanied by dramatic background music or tearful couch interviews. It was signed in cold, hard, inescapable ink. Faced with total annihilation, Kody Brown surrendered. The victory was absolute, and the execution was merciless. Janelle did not just demand her initial investment back. She forced a comprehensive, ironclad buyout of her entire portion of the Coyote Pass property. She demanded the premium market value for her acreage, outright refusing to accept the artificially deflated numbers generated by his discriminatory sun tax. She legally extracted her financial life force from the parasitic, suffocating grip of the family pot. She severed every joint account, untangled every commingled asset, and forced the patriarch to liquidate portions of his hidden hoard just to pay her what she was owed. It was a complete and total financial amputation, removing the necrotic tissue of a toxic 30-year marriage in one swift legal stroke. When the ink dried and the final wire transfers were confirmed, Janelle stood up, gathered her coat, and walked out of the law office without looking back. As she pushed through the heavy glass doors of the building, stepping out of the oppressive shadows of the mediation room and into the blinding, beautiful, untaxed sunlight of a Flagstaff afternoon, she took a breath that was 30 years in the making. The weight of a dozen different lives, the burden of funding a manufactured utopia, and the suffocating pressure of an invisible, the abusive hierarchy instantly fell away. She had achieved the impossible. She had taken on a system designed entirely to consume women, and she had beaten it at its own game. The spiritual marriage was dead, buried in a mountain of redacted bank statements and legal settlement documents. The family, as it had been marketed to the world for over a decade, was permanently fractured beyond repair. But Janelle walked away with her dignity restored, her financial independence secured, and her future entirely, unconditionally her own. She was a woman resurrected. And the patriarch? The camera of our collective imagination pulls far, far away from the bright city streets, soaring over the pine trees until it reaches the barren, silent acreage of Coyote Pass. The man who demanded absolute loyalty, the man who believed he was ordained to rule over a sprawling, multi-generational kingdom, is left standing completely alone in the mud. He is surrounded by 14 acres of dead dirt, staring blankly at a muddy runoff ditch that will never be a pond. He is clutching the deed to a kingdom that no longer has any subjects. He possesses the land, but the lifeblood that funded it is gone forever. He is left to wander his empty, unbuildable lots, trapped in the shadow of his neighbor's mansion, slowly realizing the horrifying truth that a king without a kingdom is just a man standing in the dirt, waiting for a storm. He can no longer afford the weather. The shadow empire has fallen. If this deep dive into the hidden, terrifying financial underbelly of reality television's most notorious family left you utterly speechless, you need to join our community right now. We don't just scratch the surface here. We tear up the floorboards and expose the absolute, unvarnished truth hiding beneath the carefully curated PR narratives. We are exposing the grifters, breaking down the psychological warfare, and bringing the receipts that the networks pray you never see. Do not miss a single second of our upcoming investigations. Smash that subscribe button, hit the like button to tell the algorithm you demand the truth, and sound off in the comments below. Let me know what you think about Janelle's ruthless, calculated revenge, and tell me whose financial vault we should crack wide open next. Until then, keep your eyes open, trust no narrative, and remember, where there is smoke, there is usually a shadow empire burning to the ground.